This is the Sunshine Cathedral perspective. From freedom to fear, queer genocide in Nazi Germany. LGBT life in Germany began to thrive in the early 20th century. Berlin was a liberal European city with a number of queer spaces.
By the 1920s, paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, which criminalized homosexual acts, was being applied less and less. Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science led the world in its scientific approach to sexual diversity and was a sort of public center for Berlin lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender life. In 1929, the process towards complete decriminalization was being discussed in the German legislature.
Nazi ideas of race and gender influenced the fascist regime's anti-homosexuality agenda. Repression against gay men, lesbians, and trans people began within days of Hitler becoming Chancellor. In May of 1933, the Nazis looted, vandalized, and shut down the Institute for Sexual Science, burning its extensive collection in the street.
Unknown number of queer Germans fled abroad and others entered into marriages to fool the authorities. The thriving gay culture in Berlin was in ruins.
The police established lists of homosexuals. Significant numbers of gay men were arrested. 50,000 of them were incarcerated.
In addition to the 50,000 who were jailed, as many as 15,000 other men who were accused of homosexuality were deported to concentration camps, where most of them died from starvation or exhaustion or cruel medical experiments. Sometimes hundreds of gay men were exterminated at once.
When Donald Trump mendaciously makes discredited claims about white genocide in South Africa, the Queer God Squad wants you to remember what genocide actually looks like. You know, as I was reading and thinking about this movie that came out many years ago, you may or may not have seen it, was the movie Bent. And it was
a play before that.
It was a play before that, but it's about the Holocaust. That's when we first get introduced to the pink triangle, where people started seeing it. But what preceded that was what was going on in Berlin and the surrounding areas in the gay community and how gay everyone was and everything was out. And I remember this one particular scene where one of the actors goes to the closets out in the field and he sets the closet on fire because it has all of his drag stuff in it. Mm-hmm. And then he goes into hiding and he takes off on the run. But this is a reminder about if we don't remember what history looks like, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not one of those soothsayers like, oh, we're going to repeat everything out. But it seems like we're so close to it right now on so many levels that we have to remind ourselves of history. We have to educate ourselves on what's going on and be mindful that we are the front line to this. With our actions, with our voices, and with our votes. But when someone willingly stands up in the White House and says, this is genocide that is happening in your country by holding up a photo that is not from that country, that person should be brought up on charges, dereliction of duty, misleading, and be censured. But we are reminded that we are to care for our neighbors, and care for our neighbors means caring for each other. And I think that we are now more than ever of a care for our neighbors and for ourselves moment in time when we think of stories like this.
Yeah, in case you weren't paying attention in the weeks leading up to 50-ish people were fast-tracked for immigration, for asylum, for political asylum from South Africa. 50-ish white people. I remember during apartheid, which only ended in our lifetimes, in our adults' lifetimes, it's very recent, and it lasted for decades, where the white minority ruled the entire country and actually kept the majority out of politics. Mm-hmm. When I was a teenager, there were no people of color in the South African legislature.
Right.
In fact, I don't think people of color could vote. I remember when they had the first what they called colored, and that was either Indian or mixed race people. So there was black, colored, and white. That when there was like one or two colored people in the cabinet, it was, we're getting there, we're going to make it better. But you had to do it slowly, you can't, whatever. So it was, that's where South Africa was. It was a minority ruled, supposedly democracy, but it was a democracy where the majority of the country couldn't participate.
Yeah.
Land was taken from them, their homes were taken from them, reparations not made until now. Now they are trying to do reparations, and the people who benefited from apartheid, who now have to be part of giving some stuff back and doing right, they're the ones complaining. And they're the ones who have been given this special way to come into the U.S. and get away from all that. Now, there is violence. There is chaos. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't, but the farms are owned by white people who do very little of the hard work themselves. They hire farmhands. They hire farm workers. Well, guess who those people are? And so the people who are getting hurt, getting attacked, getting threatened, those are the people that they can get to, which isn't Miss Lady of the Manor locked up with a guard and a security system in the big house. So yes, there's violence, and yes, there are all kinds of complicated feelings, but there is no genocide.
No.
There is no genocide. And if 50 rich white people are, they deserve asylum because 7%, white people are 7% of the country, they own 72% of the land. Hello. So if in this still radically unjust distribution of things, it's crazy, it's cranky, okay, deal with it. Maybe we can even help you. But that's not genocide.
No.
And if those people we welcome in and even fast track, while there are 64 countries that criminalize LGBTQ lives, where there are 11 countries where you can be executed for being LGBTQ, where trans people are running for having to resort to sex work to survive and then running from their lives even at that, where people, war-torn country, famine, starvation, if we don't have any room or time for them, and this is what we make allowance for, that exposes not only the administration's racism, which, they've made zero effort ever to hide it, but if we don't show disdain, if we don't show disgust, silence is complicity. Silence is complicity. People say, oh, you shouldn't say this or that, that's too political. Silence is political.
Yes.
So it's not, are you going to be political? It's what part of politics are you going to be part of? And if you're silent about this, then you're part of the injustice, the inequity, the oppression. So yeah, those South Africans, that is not, I'm not saying they weren't in any kind of discomfort or maybe even danger, but it's not genocide. And there are people whose lives are, and even being sent back to places where they will almost certainly die. But those people are brown or black or queer and or Muslim. And so that doesn't matter. These are white Protestant people. And do you see, and of Dutch descent. I believe the Trumps are of Dutch descent or German or some sort of Central. So anyway, it's a bad look, y'all. It is a bad look. It's a bad look for us. It's a bad look for a country that has already, with way too little remorse and atonement, has already gone through slavery and our own sort of apartheid called Jim Crow, and the just taking over of native lands and decimating their populations and incarcerating Japanese Americans in World War II, and being the only country to have ever used nuclear weapons in war, and women not getting the vote until well into the 20th century, and women not getting until the 70s, and then only to have it removed 5 decades later. For this country, we need to always err on the side of justice and grace and inclusion, and because our history is not clean enough, healthy enough, sanctified enough for us ever to give preferential option to the inheritors of the apartheid legacy.
Pay attention, folks. Pay attention, folks. History is really working very, very hard at repeating itself. And those who do not know their history are bound to repeat it. Pay attention, speak out, do something.
And I think that's the story. History speaks to us loudly. And for me, I can always see a repressive government when they start trying to hide its history, trying to hide change the names of things. Slavery was the Atlantic Passage or some crap like that. No, slavery was the bringing of black folk into America in the bowels of ships to build America.
Yes.
There was a plantation that burned recently, and people complained loudly about how it wasn't saved. There were a whole lot of people who were cheering that plantation burned to the ground, because unlike other plantations that existed, this one stood regally, proudly remembering its past. So when we talk about history repeating itself, we know that here in the United States of America, LGBTQ rights are relatively new. Marriage for us is just a little more than a decade old nationally, and everybody thought that it was done. Everybody thought that a woman's right to choose was done back in the 1970s. Nothing is ever done. Anything that was done in the past can be changed in the future if we don't pay attention. And I think that's the message. 1930s Germany is a precursor of 2020's America. And if we look at the legislation that's going through right now, it's supposed to be just a budget package, but it's a hell of a lot more. A couple of people have started to point out some of the things in there where it says the president doesn't have to listen to a Supreme Court ruling for a year. A president can stop an election if he believes that it's going to be unjust and unfair. It's in there, and we need to start reading that legislation line by line. And those who are in opposition to that legislation, they've got to stop being sweethearts. They've got to stop being nice. They've got to start fighting bare knuckles just like the other side fights. Because if we don't, if we don't make our voices heard, this country is on the brink. I don't care what anybody else tells you. I'm telling you right now, we don't have a lot of time to save our America, because those that are in power, both in the White House, in the legislature, and in the Supreme Court, don't have your best interests at heart. Pay attention to what's going on and get involved today.